Good day, everyone. I am Christina Bacalso, together with my group mates Agilus Beverly Kate, Bakudo Donna Ruth, Dagamak Maria Janeline, Sadik Namra, and Tanya Generose Eve. So I will discuss to you the dynamics of learning. So this is the general objectives. First, to understand the concept of andragogy. Second, to learn and discuss the learning methods in modern training and education. Third, to define deductive and inductive methods. Next is to discuss and understand the workplace curriculum model. Fourth, we have to discuss the importance of guided learning at work. And lastly, to know how to organize and manage workplace learning. So this is the topic outline of part 1. We have the andragogy, the definition of it, the key concept of andragogy, the benefits of andragogy, and the implication for facilitators for adult learning. For learning methods in modern training education, we have the trial and error method, learning by insight, the learning by imitation or social learning, and the transfer of training. And lastly, we have the deductive and inductive methods. So, what is andragogy? So, andragogy means the understanding of the science and practice of adult learning. This is in contrast to pedagogy, which is the understanding of the science and practice of children learning. So, andra means adult and peda means child. So, andragogy, the learning is typically very self directed, hands on, and not very reliant on the instructor or teacher. The term andragogy was first coined all the way back in 1833 by a German teacher named Alexander Knapp in an effort to categorize and describe Plato's theory of education. However, the term is mostly associated with Malcolm Knowles, an educator who had a major impact to the adult learning field. Knowles was convinced that adult learning had to be self driven rather than having education be teacher centric. Adult learning should be centered around the students and teach them the power of self motivated learning. So, andragogy is important because it frames instructional designers' approaches to corporate training programs. In knowing the characteristic of adult learners, learning programs can be more targeted and effective in the long term. So, applying andragogy to learning courses can be beneficial in supporting adult learners' needs. For adult learners, an andragogical approach helps to centralize their learning needs and leading to higher knowledge with retention rates. So, what are the key concepts of andragogy? So, Knowles identified four key assumptions in 1980 of andragogy and then added a fifth in 1984 later. So, Knowles' assumption of adult learners. So, assumption 1, a maturing self concept. As a person matures from a child to an adult, their self concept also matures. They move from being dependent on others to being self driven and independent. Maturity leads to independence and autonomy, while children learn dependently with others. Adults learn and understand independently. So Knowles described the maturation as in which individuals take the initiative with or without the help of others in diagnosing their learning needs, formulating learning goals, identifying human and material resources for learning, choosing and implementing appropriate learning strategies, and evaluating learning outcomes. So adults thrive in independent learning and training scenarios. In assumption 2, it increasing experience. As people mature, they also build their own reservoir of experience. This reservoir in turn serve as a deeper resource for their independent learning. As we grow older, we gain more experience and certain things become intuitive. Our experience allow us to intuit things that we never would have understood previously. So adult adults learn experientially, meaning they learn from first hand observations and interactions. Assumption 3, an increasing readiness to learn. So, an adult's readiness to learn becomes oriented to various social roles that they belong or included. For example, as an adult moves into the workforce, they must orient their learning toward the skills necessary for their job. As they become a parent, they suddenly must learn all that's involved in taking care of children. So, new roles require new knowledge. So, adults are attracted to learning most when they know clear objectives. The assumption 4, a shifting application and orientation. As a person matures, their application of learning becomes immediate and more problem centered. Adults encounter problems, learn how to solve those problems, and then immediately apply their knowledge to those problems. For example, when someone takes algebra in ninth grade, they don't normally apply it immediately to real life problems. So they must wait until they are older and encounter a need for algebra. So adults learn best when the topic is of immediate value. Assumption 5, an internal motivation to learn. So adults are motivated to learn internally. They want to grow in self development. They desire to move up the career ladder and need to acquire new skills. They find themselves facing an unfamiliar problem and need to find a solution. Instead of having an education forced on them, adults actually pursue education. So adults are motivated by internal factors rather than external pressures. So these five pillars provide the foundation for how Knowles understood adult learning and andragogy. So Knowles believed that all adult learning must take these five pillars into account and shape this teaching and curriculum accordingly. So Knowles' Four Principles of Andragogy. In 1984, Knowles suggested four principles that are applied to adult learning. First, adults need to be involved in the planning and evaluation of their instruction. Second, experience or including mistakes provides the basis for the learning activities. Third, adults are most interested in learning subjects that have immediate relevance and impact to their job or personal life. And lastly, adult learning is problem centered rather than content oriented, according to Kersley 2010. So, what do we get from andragogy? According to Knowles, adult education should produce these outcomes. First, a mature understanding of oneself. So, a proper adult education helps adults understand themselves clearly and objectively. As they grow in self understanding, adults should also increase in self respect and a passion for continuing growth. Second, acceptance, respect, and love toward others. So, andragogy should lead adults to increasingly accept, respect, and love others. So there must be a keen understanding of the difference between people and ideas. So this understanding will give adults the power to thinking critically about ideas without attacking or threatening the people who hold them. Third, a fluid and a dynamic attitude toward life. Adult learning should create a dynamic, even passionate attitude toward life that causes people to embrace every new experience as an opportunity to learn. Fourth, understanding and reacting to causes, not symptoms. So rather than only seeing symptoms, adults should be able to see beneath to the actual root causes of the problem. Once they understand the root causes, they can appropriately react. So fifth is the understanding human experience. Andragogy creates a perspective shift. It teaches people to understand, appreciate, and share the ideas, experiences, and traditions of the past. So rather than denigrating the past as irrelevant, it highlights it as an essential. So, lastly, we have the understanding of and ability to change society. So, living in democracy requires that adults be able to understand the society they live in and bring about effective change. So, thus, proper adult education educates people on the social order and how that social order is shaped. Implication for facilitators of adult learning. So, in creating and leading courses for adult learning, andragogy should be at the center of the design. This theory helps facilitators develop and guide adult learners toward success. By taking the following steps, facilitators can create programs that cater to adult learners' needs. We have a set a cooperative climate for learning that assesses learners' specific needs, develop learning objectives based on learners' skill levels, needs, and interests, design activities to achieve objectives, collaborate with learners to find methods, materials, and resources for instruction. And lastly, to evaluate the quality of the learning experience and make adjustments as needed while assessing needs for future learning. So, this theory relies heavily on autonomy, collaboration, enablement, and self direction. For facilitators, an andragogical approach to learning informs them of the needs of their adult learners and can lead to more successful programs. Methods of learning. First, we have the trial and error method. So, this is the most primitive and simplest way in which learning occurs. Placed in a new situation, the individual makes a number of random movements. Those which are unsuccessful are eliminated, and successful ones are fixed. So, it is learning by blundering, by trying something, and succeeding or failing. So, in reality, though workers realize that they must test and try things out to know that a solution works. They continually refer to the process of elimination, workarounds, or handling exemptions. To them, this is normally accepted language while doing work. So, Jonathan Workman, exceptional design at Flint Hills Resources, a Coach Brothers company, says trial and error is an opportunity to learn. So trial and error is a powerful way to learn. No question. Of course, you've got to apply it in the right context of trial and error and safety situations idea. I think you've got to have the attitude that when you have an error or failure, it's certainly not a negative thing because failure or that error part is an opportunity to learn. So by having those failures and errors, you kind of find out what doesn't work. So maybe it sparks ideas about things in a different way that could be beneficial. And so trial and error is absolutely essential to learning. So second, we have the learning by insight. So it is a sudden realization of a solution to a problem. Because of its suddenness, insight learning is different from a trial and error learning, which requires more careful experimentation to arrive at a solution. So, Gestalt psychologists oppose the trial and error method. They argue that learning is not a blind and mechanical process. It involves insight into the total situation. So, learning by observation is learning by insight, learning by perceiving the relationship in the scene and understanding the situation. So, after looking over the whole situation, the learner strives to make some sense of it and it gives clues regarding the way he should proceed to solve the problem, the method he should pursue, and a general awareness of the consequences of performing an act. So, what are the stages of insight learning? First, we have the preparation. So, in the preparation phase, the problem is introduced and the subject has the information and materials laid out in front of him or her. The subject begins processing the stimuli in front of him or her and making connection. Second, we have the incubation. During the incubation phase, the subject has seemingly given up on the problem. However, the brain is still thinking about the problem unconsciously. The brain is unconsciously analyzing the problem, working toward an moment or turning point. Third is insight. The insight phase is when the subject has a breakthrough moment in solving problem. And lastly, we have the verification. The final stage is the verification phase, wherein the subject tests the theory generated through the insight phase to see if the solution will work. In other words, the subject verified the solution to see it works. So the next method of learning is learning by imitation or social learning. So imitation is one of the most important means of learning. Human beings, consciously or unconsciously, imitate the actions, manners, and style of his fellow being. So when applied to the workplace, it steps away from the corporate machine and reintroduces the human element. This places trust in individual, the employee, and gives them responsibility for their own knowledge and actions. So we have four principles of social learning. First, we have the attention. In order to imitate an action, it has to grab our attention. When attention is successfully grabbed, these observations are then stored within memory. Next is retention. The attention grabbing memory can be recalled whenever necessary or when the learner can experience similar situation wherein he or she saw the action. Third is the reproduction. After recalling, the learner will decide whether to reproduce it or not, or he or she thinks it will result to a positive outcome. He or she most likely to reproduce the attention grabbing observation than he or she recalled. Lastly, we have the motivation. Both the negative and positive rewards can inspire the learner to either avoid and reproduce a specific action. Motivation comes from rewards or benefit as well as the competition and personal pride. Next method, we have the transfer of training. The goal of training is to enhance the skills, knowledge, and the thinking and learning ability of employees. But even more important, it's the capability to apply the new information, skills, or knowledge in the employee's job. Transfer of training means that training is transferred from one skill to another. So it has special significance for all kinds of the industrial training program. So stated simply, transfer of training deals with whether or not learning in one situation will facilitate learning and therefore performance. So in subsequent similar situations. Possibilities of transfer. So, positive transfer we have when learning in one situation facilitates learning in one situation. Example, knowledge of mathematics facilitates to learn physics better. In negative transfer, when learning of one task makes the learning of another task harder. Example is left handed drive vehicles hindering the learning of right hand drive. The neutral transfer. When learning of one activity neither facilitates or hinders the learning of another task, it is also called a zero transfer. So let's talk about deductive and inductive methods. Two very distinct and opposing instructional approaches are inductive and deductive. Both approaches can offer certain advantages, but the biggest difference is the role of teacher. In a deductive classroom, the teacher conducts lesson by introducing and explaining concepts to students, and then expecting students to complete tasks to practice the concepts. This approach is very centered. Conversely, inductive instruction is much more student-centered approach and makes use of a strategy known as noticing. So deductive method or deductive instruction. So it is more teacher-centered approach. The deductive approach represents a more traditional style of teaching in that the grammatical structures or rules are dictated to the students first. So the teacher gives the students a new concept, explains it, and then has the students practice using the concept. In a classroom example, the teacher writes simple sentences to explain the rules of the past and present tenses. After this, they hand out worksheets wherein students are asked to convert past tense to present tense and vice versa. In workplace example, developing a marketing plan that will be effective for a specific audience. So we have these advantages of deductive method. For advantages of deductive method, it suits the topic. Sometimes the knowledge being imparted lends itself to the deductive method. If you are teaching a concept where the rules are clear, the classroom might benefit from a teacher led explanation followed by further exploration. Second, it suits the learner. Some learners too may benefit from this method. The inductive approach is very energy intensive for learner, and some may need more a roadmap than others. It it's equally possible that a strong inductive learner is one subject might prefer another teaching approach for another subject. And it's efficient. If speed is a priority, the deductive teaching method is an efficient way of communicating by providing students within the information they need to learn so teachers can deliver the required material. For the disadvantages of deductive method, it's top down. It's a teacher centric approach. This assumes that the teacher is the source of knowledge and the learners are passive vessel for this. So, not right for all. Not all learners learn in a deductive way. The deductive method of teaching is commonly preferred in traditional educational organization, but not all learners benefit from it. For some, it's necessary to come to knowledge themselves to assimilate the information effectively. And lastly, limits learner scope. It stifles original thinking. When we convey information with a top down approach, it may discourage learners from asking questions or expressing their own understanding. This can be to the detriment of the individual learner, but also to their peers who learn from one another and not just from the instructor. Next, we have the inductive method or inductive instruction. So it is more learner-centered approach. Instead of explaining a given concept following this explanation with examples, the teacher presents students with many examples showing how the concept is used. The intent is for students to notice by way of the examples how the concept works. So noticing is the process of students becoming aware of something in particular. So, in a classroom example, students are given images of instruments, including those from different groups wind, string, and percussion. So, they're asked to categorize them, work in groups, and state their own logic. In workplace example, it's deciding on incentive plans based on an employee survey. What are the advantages and disadvantages of inductive method? For advantages, it promotes critical thinking. By not providing the answers upfront to students, it invites them to come up with rules based on information they have. This is a cognitive and metacognitive ability that holds them in a good stead in adult problem solving and decision making. So, metacognition is the process of thinking about one's own thinking. It's self knowledge the knowledge of your own mind and its processes. So, cognition is all about mental processes involved in any act or process of acquiring knowledge, including perception, memory, attention, language, thinking, problem solving, and decision making. The meta is a second level of meaning that often relates to the self. So, the definition of metacognition is all about one's thoughts and feelings about acquiring new knowledge. For the disadvantages, it can relate inequality. So you may see in an example of inductive teaching that not all students will respond equally well, which can create a loop-sided classroom. It requires an open environment where errors are accepted and even welcome to be impactful for all. Another advantages, we have the engages students participation. It's hard to concentrate in environment which we constantly receive information. The mind wanders and attention flags. So inductive method examples, group work is often encouraged and students are expected to present their work and findings. So it also forces them to think for themselves. And lastly, the advantages is learning is long term. So, by engaging the brain more fully, inductive method of teaching examples can help students retain information. Having puzzled over facts and figures and other forms of data, learners have closer relationship with subject they are studying. So, even making mistakes can make facts more memorable. For the disadvantages, we have takes time. Sometimes students come up with incorrect hypotheses. So it's part of process to work through this, but there might not always be enough time to make the most of this. And lastly is topic is complex. Not all facts can be reasoned through. Sometimes if the information is too complex, it is based to explain it up front. When inductive teaching method is employed in the wrong place, students can get frustrated by the lack of progress. So this is the topic outline in part 2. We have a workplace curriculum model, a curriculum for the workplace, a model of a workplace curriculum, developing the workplace curriculum, the guided learning at work. We have guided learning in the workplace, guided learning for transfer. For organizing and managing workplace learning, we have enterprises and the workplace curriculum, support for guided learning in the workplace, different requirements for different workplaces, encouraging participation, selecting the guides, preparing the guides, and lastly, preparing workers or learners. So what is the difference between curriculum model and workplace curriculum model? So this curriculum model seeks to make full use of the learning available through everyday participation in work activities guided by expert co-workers assisted by the contribution of other workers and the workplace environment itself. Consequently, the workplace curriculum model is intended to assist workers wishing to learn about or develop further their vocational knowledge and to help enterprises organize effective workplace learning. In addition, it can also be used to enrich vocational education programs that are shared between the workplace and an educational institution. So the principles underpinning this model are intended to provide structured experiences to develop in individuals the attributes required for expert work performance. Identify and structure a pathway of learning experiences that take into account enterprise needs and those of the individuals who are learning. Use direct guidance to assist development of understanding and hone procedures required for expert practice. Assist learners to participate fully through structured learning arrangements that provide access to indirect guidance in the workplace, and lastly, focus on a learning curriculum rather than one in which direct teaching predominates. A model of a workplace curriculum. The model of a workplace curriculum proposed is based on the structuring of activities and guidance in the workplace or guiding learning at work. The model proposes organizing access to a pathway of activities which takes a learner from being a novice through to being expert in the work practice, from peripheral to full participation according to Lev and when during 1991, the pathway engages learners in movement from work activities of low accountability and complexity to activities that are high in accountability and complexity. From this, it is proposed that the four key elements in the structuring of a workplace curriculum are movement from participation in low to high accountability work activities. In this movement, it is implemented by making the workers or novices engage from a simple task to more complex tasks step by step in order to expose them further in their responsibility and also foster workplace learning. Access to knowledge that would not be learned by discovery alone. In this element, we make sure that we provide the novice says or workers is provided the knowledge that are essential for the workers to know or to learn. The workplace should provide the learners the opportunity to learn essential knowledge. Direct guidance from more experienced and others experts. Direct guidance is helpful as it focuses on the workers' activities and ensuring that they are learning and also doing activities properly. Also, in practicing direct guidance, we secure access to activities for the novices to learn to guard them against inappropriate knowledge that may hinder them to be productive or may pose a threat to their safety. Help them access knowledge that is hidden and also provided direct guidance in development of procedures, making them learn specific techniques that can only be learned through close guidance. Indirect guidance provided by the physical and social environment. Indirect guidance can be almost anything in the workplace, such as breathing signages to chatting with other workers and even just observing other people to do their work. So, indirect guidance may serve as a model of practice to workers to which they can gauge or compare their skills and progress. So, this is a model of a workplace curriculum. Developing the workplace curriculum. As a part of developing a workplace curriculum, there needs to be understanding of what compromises effective performance in the workplace. This includes the sequencing of work activities that need to be undertaken, the ways they are to be performed, and those things that are difficult to learn in these activities. To understand these factors requires an analysis of the work activities. So, to understand these factors, an analysis of existing practice should be used to provide information for organizing the workplace curriculum. However, this information may be augmented by contribution about what is currently being practiced, and it can be thus be changed to improve workplace goals. A range of strategies exist for gathering information about work. This includes the use of surveys, interviews, observation, critical incident interviews, task analysis, and etc. The degree to which the analysis of work in the enterprise need to be highly detailed and documented is likely to be determined by the scope of the enterprise's activities and needs to detail these requirements. The assumption adopted here is that some identification, detailing of pathways, goal for learning, and components of work that are difficult to learn would be useful in most workplace learning situations. The detailing of pathways indicates the requirements for performance in the workplace. So, identification of work tasks that are difficult to learn represents the minimum approach required to structure effective learning activities in the workplace. Overall, the scope of development task is to delineate work areas, determine the requirements for performance, develop a pathway or pathways of activities, and identify tasks of work that are difficult to learn about. So let's talk about the guided learning at work. So, guided learning. The kinds of expert guidance provided to less experienced workers will have a direct influence on the quality of learning in the workplace. In particular, guidance in the form of direct interaction and collaborative problem solving can help develop the robust knowledge required for vocational expertise. Such guidance includes helping individuals learn knowledge that they might not be able to access alone and providing insight into work and procedures for conducting that work effectively. Consequently, it is worthwhile for enterprises to develop guided learning as a part of everyday work practice and to intentionally structure and prepare for such learning. So, guidance at work can take a number of forms, ranging from being a mentor who guides and supports an individual's career trajectory over a period of years, to assisting a novice in a familiar task through to being role model in avoidance of detrimental behavior according to Garvey 1994 and Gay 1994. So the form of guidance focused on her involves more experienced or expert workers assisting in the development of the vocational practice or less experienced workers. The guided learning in the workplace. Learning is an active process which is influenced by external contribution but ultimately determined and regulated by individuals. This realization have to lead to the conclusion that the effectiveness of direct teaching may have been overestimated according to Brown and Palenskar 1989 and Rugoff 1990 to 1995. Accordingly, the emerging goal for instruction is to find ways of placing the task of responsibility for learning upon learners themselves. At the same time, they need to be supported in order to guide the kinds of learning that occur. So according to Berater and Scardamalia 1989 and Collins et al. 1989, both modeled their methods directly on apprenticeship learning in workplaces. Both both methods intend to develop learners' ability to think and act like experts by modeling how experts conduct tasks and assess learners in different ways to learn these expert approaches to thinking. So Collins et al. A 1989 model of learning aims to develop the procedures and conceptual knowledge required for performance and monitoring and self-correction skills required for expertise. These outcomes are highly consistent with the aims and procedures of the second and third levels of guided learning in the workplace. So components of the cognitive apprenticeship approach is modeling, coaching, scaffolding, and fading are used as a means of describing the second level of guided learning. So a sequential use of these strategies in work setting is proposed. So there are um, discuss what is each of these components of cognitive apprenticeship approach. So first we have the modeling. Modeling is the process whereby experts perform a task with learners observing and building a mental model of the demonstrated task and the requirements for performance. So the principle here is one of the modeling first for an understanding of the overall performance, then developing an understanding of the component part of the task. Next is coaching. Coaching is a process of guiding and monitoring learning through work activities. Initial attempts at work tasks can be described as being immature approximations of model tasks. As procedures are learned and honed, these attempts increase the effectiveness of such approximations of model tasks and become increasingly mature through these practices. That is, approximations of the task improve through practice and guidance, so they become closer to the experts smoothly perform and model procedures. So in coaching, strategies such as hints, feedbacks, clues, as well as demonstrations and modeling tricks of the trade can be used to assess the development of the required workplace procedures. So coaching can include repeated demonstration or remodeling of tasks or parts of tasks to assist learners improve their performance. So scaffolding and fading. Beyond initial modeling and coaching, ongoing support and monitoring can be provided in the form of scaffolding. This compromises providing learners with opportunities to practice independently those tasks for which they are ready while monitoring their performance with task performance. As Brown and Palanskar 1989 state, the metaphor of a scaffold captures the idea of an adjustable and temporary support that can be removed when no longer necessary. Scaffolding may involve carrying out part of a task that the learner cannot yet perform independently, or repeating modeling or demonstrating the task. Scaffolding is premised on a collaborative approach to learning, which with the learning taking the responsibility for the work task. So fading consists of a gradual removal of support until learners can independently perform the task proficiently. The direct forms of guidance available in the workplace direct support this independent practice. Note, the duration and the intensity of the phases of modeling, coaching, scaffolding, and fading will differ according to learners' readiness and the demands of the task to be learned. These strategies may tend to emphasize the development of procedures rather than conceptual knowledge. So this is because much of the focus is on actual performance rather than the understanding required for performance. Strategies for developing understanding. A rich understanding about vocational practice is central to workplace performance. So Berryman 1993 notes the growing significance of symbolic and other forms of conceptual knowledge in contemporary and emerging work practice. So referred as being opaque or hidden, this knowledge may not be readily learned because it is inaccessible for learners. For example, construction workers and miners need to understand concept of force, pressure, and load. Food workers have to know about hygiene and food contamination, even though many aspects of this concept may remain hidden. However, these understanding are not always readily learned through everyday work activities. So, although modeling and coaching can secure some of these outcomes, a number of strategies that specifically focus on conceptual development have been identified. Their selection is based on their usefulness for developing understanding and ability to use during everyday work activities. So these strategies are questioning dialogues, the diagrams and models, and analogies. So questioning dialogues. Questioning dialogues are interaction between experts and learners conducted through question. They engage learners in the process of learning through successive phases of questions and responses. This process requires learners to elaborate and justify, substantiate their thinking, thereby extending it. The diagrams and models. Diagrams and models can be used to provide physical or symbolic representation of objects or processes that are difficult to explain or experience. The diagram need only be basic enough to visually represent the objects or processes. Diagrams can be used to understand production processes such as flow of materials or products, or complex service requirements such as layouts of warehouses or restaurants. The analogies. Analogies are used to link something learners already with concepts that need to be learned. A situation or circumstance or occurring outside the workplace can be used as a basis for illustrating something that happens in the workplace. Similarities and differences can be pointed out by using analogy. For instance, the example of flow of water along a garden hose pipe is often used to explain how electrical current flows, with kinks in hose pipes being used as analogies for resistors. Analogies can be used by guide presenting the analogy and the learner being asked to identify and or describe similarities and differences between the analogy used and the target situation or task. Guided learning for transfer. This kind of guided learning is concerned specifically with learning that will transfer beyond the workplace situation in which the knowledge was initially learned. This transfer could be respond to a novel or non-routine workplace task arising in the workplace or to transfer existing practice to other workplaces. Therefore, rather than having a specific workplace focus, this level of guidance seeks to assist workers to transfer their knowledge more generally within their vocation. However, there is a clear and deliberate focus on learning that seek to overcome the constraints of learning in one setting and that might inhibit the development of transferable vocational knowledge. So accordingly, guided learning for transfer can be viewed as developing vocational expertise that is applicable to circumstances other than where the original learning occurred. Extending vocational knowledge through guided learning. The aim is to develop self assessment, self regulation, and monitoring skills within their vocation. Central to achieving this goal is the need to generate what Piaget 1967 refers to as disequilibrium in the learner. To press workplace learners into recognizing their incompleteness of their vocational knowledge to motivate them to extend it further. As Brown Palanskar 1989 adapted change is presumed to be fostered in situations that encourage dissatisfaction with the existing state of knowing. Accordingly, a key concern is to engage learners in producing the questions, scenarios, and solutions and then monitoring their responses. These processes aim to foster habits of self-assessment, self-regulation, and self-monitoring associated with the vocation. The development goal is to construct richer procedures and concepts associated with individuals' vocational domains. These include the self-regulated approaches to active problem solving mentioned above, the abstraction of principles associated with vocational practice. Coaching and scaffolding can be adapted for some purposes. This is quite consistent with the goals developing transferable knowledge through guided learning as proposed by Brown and Palaskar 1989 and Collins et al. 1989. For example, coaching can be used to extend learners' knowledge, asking learners to consider whether else they can use a particular procedure or suggesting changes in approach given the different application of procedure or process can assist in developing a robust base of knowledge. Equally, questioning diagrams can encourage learners to extend their knowledge and abstract principled knowledge from particular instances. For example, questioning might be used to help the warehouse worker establish a set of principles about pallet packing that can apply to different kinds of packing and preparation for transportation. These processes are focused on developing and testing the potential for generalization of concept procedures associated with vocational practice. Generalizing from what has been learned. The aim here is to extend the learning by developing a richer account of its potential applicability to other situations. Importantly, this includes recognizing the limits of its generalizability, having learned how to perform a particular task or skill. So, workplace learners can be encouraged to understand the degree to which what they have learned is more or less transferable to other situations, the limits of its application. They could also be asked where else the learning could be applied, what else it might be applied to, and asked to identify the limits on application of the learning. One means of achieving generalization of what has been learned is for the learners to experience how vocational procedures and concepts and the values that underpin them are manifested in different workplace settings. Opportunities for learners to access different circumstances in which the vocational practice applies should be utilized if at all possible, as long as there is sufficient time to learn and reinforce what is learned and understand difference between them. These diverse experiences may help to develop a rich and transferable body of vocational knowledge. Self assessment and comparison with other workers. The monitoring and self assessment of completed tasks is an important quality of expert performance, according to Stevenson 1994. um, Engendering this kind of habit plays an important role in developing self-regulated learning and assisting monitoring of the accomplishment of tasks. This can be achieved through encouraging comparison in performance with other co-workers and experts. So Schoenfield 1985 refers to is a post-mortem analysis, reflection on completed tasks to consider and to develop strategies for performance. From this reflection, the capacity for self correction skills can be developed. This is an important component of self regulated learning and of the development of knowledge robust enough to transfer to other situations. So, environments that encourage questioning, evaluating, criticizing, and generally worrying knowledge, taking it as an object of thought, are believed to be fruitful breeding grounds for the restructuring of knowledge, as just outlined. So there is potential for such environments to be created in workplaces through the use of questioning, getting learners to predict consequences, and illuminating the breadth of application. Co-workers can assist in this development. So let's talk about the organizing and managing workplace learning. So enterprises and the workplace curriculum. So a company plays a significant role in developing and ensuring vocational expertise at work. Consequently, the quality of vocational practice learned at work. The effectiveness of the workplace curriculum and the way in which guided participation proceeds will largely be a product of their organization and management within the enterprise. So it seems that some of the knowledge required for expertise can be learned through everyday work activities, just doing it. However, the structuring of workplace learning experience can extend to supplement the contribution of everyday activities. This structuring involves the development of a workplace curriculum and the provision of guided learning by experienced or expert workers. So this is a key basis of ongoing learning is to develop through vocational practice through work. For this reason, enterprises should welcome the prospect of a workplace curriculum given its potential to develop the practice of the workplace. So according to Roden 1995 to 1997, engaging workers in the development and enactment of the workplace curriculum can generate the reciprocal workplace relations that characterize enterprises that stand the test of time and grow. So there are two factors determining the quality of learning in the workplace are mainly either organizational or individual. Organizational factors include the quality of guidance, so its accessibility or availability, and access to sequence pathway of workplace activities. So individual factors include the willingness of expert to guide and of learners to engage in guided learning. Organizational factors are direct responsibilities of enterprises, and some of the individual concerns can be eased by actions within the enterprise. So, that is what happens within the work practice will likely have a direct impact on the quality of learning at work. Therefore, the support and sponsorship of the enterprise will influence the quality of learning within the workplace. However, in this making this point, it is important to reiterate the quality of learning is not solely the responsibility of the enterprise's management. Instead, it is shared across the enterprises. Enterprises can develop learning arrangement, provide opportunities, and support the ease the access for participation in developing vocational practice. However, the direction, strength, and persistence of individuals' participation will also be key determinants both as learning guides as a learners. Individuals determine the outcomes of how they engage in learning. The ideal is the workplace afford a rich learning experience through quality guided learning. So in for workers to participate with effort and persistent in these experiences. This ideal provides a goal for the organization and management of workplace learning. So we have the fourfold goals of the enterprise. First, to support the development and implementation of the workplace curriculum. Second, to tailor the workplace curriculum to the enterprise's work practice. Third is encouraging participation by both learners and those who will guide. And lastly, to ensure the thorough um, preparation of guides and briefing of learners. Support for guided learning in the workplace. Enterprises are often attracted to work based learning because of the prospect of accessible, pertinent, and cost effective ways of developing the skills they need to um, effective work practice. Some skills are developed through learning as a part of everyday work activities. However, they just need to prepare for organized structuring of workplace experiences and guidance. Just situating learning arrangements in the workplace is not sufficient. The organization of those experiences to achieve enterprise's stated goals of relevant learning is also required. So, workers' access to the pathway of work activities of increasing complexity and accountability needs to be structured and consciously managed and supported in workplace. So, resources need to be allocated to identify the pathways of activities, to establish what knowledge is difficult to learn, and to ascertain what learning constitutes expertise in workplace. So, SEFTA 1993 found that the involvement and the more collaborative the approach adopted in the workplace, the more likely it is that there will be acceptance of what is implemented. It is not so much initiates change that is important, rather, whether workers are allowed to participate in the process of developing a workplace curriculum will influence its acceptance and adoption, or conversely, its rejection by those in the workplace. So, the wider the development and engagement in determining the pathways of activities and identifying the requirements for work, the more likely its acceptance in the workplace will be. The thorough preparation of workplace learning guides and the briefing of those who will work with these guides requires sponsorship and support within enterprise. Guided learning is also dependent on the environment conducive to securing interaction among workers and opportunities. The key goal of enhanced participation will necessitate finding ways to encourage workers who are reluctant to participate and to moderate their access to situations where they have opportunities to learn and practice. However, expectations need to be realistic. Not all workers will be able to move through the pathway to expert practice at the pace of their choosing, for their movement will depend on opportunities for engagement and practice in this task and enterprise needs. This movement needs to be paced appropriately and takes time to develop work-related knowledge, even more for expertise. So, key factors in enterprises' long-term survival are development of a high level of enterprises specific in individuals' work engagement with the enterprise, according to Roden 1995 to 1997. So SEFTA 1993 demonstrated the high degree of satisfaction levels of participation realized when workers are involved in the planning of training arrangements within workplace. To summarize, while enterprises are drawn to the accessibility, pertinence, and apparent cost effectiveness of workplace learning, it would be mistaken to believe that rich learning outcomes are achievable without sponsorship and support. It follows that unless workplace learning is organized and supported, the rich opportunity to learn the knowledge for work within the workplace could be squandered. Different requirements for different workplaces. The requirements for the workplace curriculum and the ways in which it should be best organized will differ across workplaces. These differences cannot simply be explained in terms of being better or worse manifestation of the occupational practice. They are simply due to different requirements for performance at work. Situational needs influence the organizational structures and cultures or practice in workplaces, make implementation of a uniform curriculum impossible. So there are also differences in how guided participation at work is likely to proceed. Therefore, rather than easy and perform access to guided participation, it should associated with physical, different or separate workspace, time, different shifts, and geographical remote isolation need to be understood in considering the requirements for guided learning in a particular work place. Encouraging participation. Employees' participation is a significant factor to the success of a workplace curriculum. However, too much or too less participation is quite a problem. Too much enthusiasm to participate may lead employees to overstep their boundaries. Too less enthusiasm to participate makes employees stagnant and passive. So encourage participation among employees by providing them positive reinforcement such as rewards, merits, and etc. So reluctance of experts to participate in providing guidance is due to the fear of displacement and or efforts going under unrewarded. So therefore there is a need to reassure experienced workers that their efforts in guiding learners will not result in their displacement, marginalization, or replacement. We have the selecting the guides. The most common and acceptable practice is for the enterprises to nominate a learning guide, usually a supervisor. So workplace learning guides should have expertise in the work area, be an expert author, can handle novel problems, and possess work-related knowledge to share with learners, must viewed as being credible, understand the goals for performance, and understand what is required for successful performance in workplace. So value guided learning, see a need for it and for the knowledge to be learned by learners, and have a willingness to share knowledge with learners. And lastly, be a guide for learners rather than a teacher, and making learners to do the thinking and acting. Preparing the guides. So, a thorough preparation for learners' guides is essential to maximize the contribution of the workplace curriculum. To provide appropriate guidance, experienced workers need understanding of and competence in guided approach to learning to secure desired learning outcomes in their learners, including a capacity to engender collaborative relations with co-workers. So we have the three dimensions to guided learning programs. First is understanding of guided participation at work. Principles include learning through everyday goal directed activities, the basis of individuals' construction of knowledge, being guided in learning rather than being taught, and the kinds of knowledge required for vocational expertise, including knowledge which is difficult to learn. So, principles underpinning techniques such as coaching, modeling, and scaffolding also need to be understood, as do the techniques focusing on developing conceptual knowledge. Second is the inability to use the guided approaches to learning and the techniques selected for use as a part of everyday work activity. This includes the ability to use these techniques in the workplace, understanding the circumstances in which they could be best be applied in a particular workplace context, and understanding their selective use. This includes having the capacity to judge where each strategy is likely to be more or less effective. And third is the ability to build relationships. The need to balance encourage learners to do the thinking and acting without them believing that they are on a trial and without making the task too difficult. The need to consider the importance of being empathetic, postponing judgment, and providing supportive feedback. And second, to develop a relationship focused on developing workers' knowledge. Preparing workers or learners to enhance involvement and overcome potential concerns about the workplace learning process. All learners to be involved in the workplace curriculum should be brief about the aims of the guided learning and the processes being used. The briefing might be comprise an overview of the kinds of learning outcomes being attempted, the goals of this learning, the kinds of guided learning techniques they are likely to encounter, and the role of the guided of learning guides. So briefing should particularly cover and aim for the following. First, the workers' responsibilities as learners need to be clearly stated together with the probable outcomes and benefits they will gain from participation in the guided learning. This briefing could be also be used to explain that the aim of guided learning is to get the learners to do the thinking. Second, it should be emphasized that the learners are not being appraised for any purpose other than their development. Third is the expectations of the learning guide should be clearly stated. And lastly, if there is a need for any inducement, rewards, or certification from participation, this needs to be clearly articulated. So that's all. Thank you for listening.